Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I am your host Sree Iyer. Today I have a new guest, Levsa Bayankhail. Levsa has worked for human rights since 2012 and has worked with an American independent human rights activist, Benkin R. Richard, on a book called Radical Islam. She is a former PTM, Denmark Information Secretary, and today one of the core members of the Pashtun Protection Movement Committee in Denmark. She holds a bachelor's degree in public administration and recently got a Master of Science in public administration. Her research was on Pakistan secret cooperation with the Taliban in Afghanistan, where she interviewed 5 generals from the NATO and US and one former Afghan governor and one expert from Denmark. Also joining me is Professor M.D. Nalapat, who of course needs no introduction. So welcome to our show, Levsa, for the first time, and welcome, Professor Nalapat.
Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be part of this show. Thank you.
The privilege is all ours, Levsa, and I'm hoping that our viewers will get a history lesson as well as what is happening up until now in Pashtunistan. And we kind of get it mixed up. Sometimes we call it Pak with a K, sometimes we call it with an S, and sometimes we drop both and say Pathan. But anyway, the point I think I'm trying to make is we want to straighten out all these things today. And we also want to go back in history a little bit. But before doing all that stuff, I just want to tell you some interesting developments that took place a couple of weeks ago in California. There was a Free Pashtunistan demonstration in front of the governor's mansion in California in Sacramento. And there were some speeches made, and we are going to give you some excerpts of that as part of this conversation. But Professor Nalapat, suddenly there is a lot of interest about Pashtuns, Pashtunistan, their causes, how they are being suppressed by the Pakistani government. Can you kind of give us a 360-degree view, and then we can talk to our guest today about specifics of what the Pashtuns are facing in Pakistan?
Well, we have a true expert on the Pashtun people in Levsa Bayankhail, and but I'd like to say that from my knowledge of the study of the Pashtun people, and I would like to point out that from my research, I have come to the conclusion that Afghanistan was actually the Pashtun people were a very modern and progressive people. I mean, you had, King Zahir Shah was definitely modern and progressive. Even President Dawood was very modern and progressive. And Pashtun women were quite progressive. And they wanted to be educated. And they were going around and they had made their mark across the world. And suddenly in the 1980s, what happened? 79, you had this most unwarranted invasion by Russia. In fact, the problem had begun from the 1970s when the Russians really wanted to make Pashtunistan their Pakistan. You remember, the Pakistan military was essentially, totally dominated by the US. So the Russians thought, India is too big to dominate, but why don't we try and see if we can dominate Pakistan through Afghanistan? And they launched they did a large number of political movements in Afghanistan. They had some presidents, 2 of them they were not happy with. One of them died mysteriously. The other also was died, and the last was killed in a very brutal way. Who was actually, from my reckoning, he was a fairly successful individual in trying to unite Afghanistan, but regrettably he chose the wrong side in this particular war, and the Americans, frankly, had nothing but what do I say? They just left him to their fate, which is a horrible fate. The Taliban took over in 1996, courtesy President Lincoln. He was very cruelly executed. Now, from the 70s, therefore, you see a change in not only possibly the sociology inside Afghanistan, and the Pashtun people are, if not the majority, possibly the majority, and definitely the most powerful community in Afghanistan. The others are there, they're wonderful people, but it's the Pashtuns who are really the dominant community in Afghanistan. So what happened was that, the United States, and I've been saying this right from the 1990s, not really from the 1980s, but from the 1990s, certainly I've been writing extensively about it and talking about it. I think the United States made a wrong call. There were a large number of Pashtun nationalists. People like for example, Levsa and her husband, who's an equally, if I may say so, proud and independent Pashtun. So people like that. And the Pashtun nationalists were much bigger in number than the Pashtun religious extremists, who had been, in a sense, nurtured through certain institutions funded by Saudi Arabia, funded by other Middle Eastern states, and frankly, staffed by individuals from Pakistan, and individuals who are most likely not even Pashtun. Most of them were actually from a different province, the province that controls the Pakistan military. All three of us know what that province is. There's no need to repeat it here. This is actually, the Americans chose the wrong side. Instead of empowering the Pashtun moderates, the Pashtun nationalists, their ally Pakistan persuaded them to empower Pashtun radicals, because their ally Pakistan was afraid that if Pashtun nationalists, Pashtun moderates become dominant in Afghanistan, doing the very necessary task of removing the Soviet occupiers and invaders, then the Pashtuns in Pakistan also would fall out of their control. And the Pashtuns in Pakistan, the Balochs, the Pashtuns, the Sindhis, the Muhajirs, they're all under the control of the military. And the military is under the control, people say Punjabi, but in Punjab there is that Potiawari region. It's basically a Potiawari, it's not even a Punjabi military, it's a Potiawari military. So that was the beginning, in my view, of the problems that came in Afghanistan. This deliberate empowering of radicals by Carter. You had Brzezinski, who was the National Security Advisor. He was viscerally anti-American. He would have signed a pact with any power in the world in order to do something against Russia. He was viscerally Russophobic. We are seeing the same kind of Russophobia now, by the way, erupt in some parts of the world. And then after that, you had multiple people and two US presidents, and they unfortunately put the Pakistan military in the driver's seat, and the Pakistan military put the small fringe of Pashtun extremists in the driver's seat, and that fringe unfortunately grew at the expense of the majority of Pashtuns, who were moderate and who were frankly, very patriotic and very willing to fight for their country. The Pakistan army wanted people who would fight for Pakistan. The Pashtun nationalists wanted to fight for Afghanistan, for the Pashtun people.
Thank you very much, Professor Nalapat. Zbigniew Brzezinski, was he Polish American by any chance?
Well, he was a very brilliant chap, but I think he, like many Americans, now you have one or two Ukrainians there whom I've seen, one of them formerly in uniform, who are completely Ukrainian. And yes. Brzezinski, in some ways, was completely Polish. And as a Polish individual, he didn't like the Soviet Union at all. And who can blame him? Because the Soviet Union, the Russians acting as the masters of Poland. You can't blame Brzezinski for that.
Yes, and United States went through a series of foreign-born people who were the secretaries of state, starting with Henry Kissinger, then Zbigniew Brzezinski, and so on and so forth. Very interesting period. Anyway, let's move past that and let's come back to the topic that we were talking about, Pashtun. Viewers, you need to understand that the Durand line is an artificial construct that was drawn by the British to keep a proud race separate. That is the Pashtun race. That is how I understood it. I've read quite a bit because, believe it or not, I had to prepare a bit, Levsa, for this particular conversation. And again, I would urge our viewers to read the book Narendra Singh Sarila's Shadow of a Great Game. The ebook as well as the print version, some limited copies are available in Amazon.com. You will be able to get the ebook anywhere in the world. It is important because he was the last, or probably the only Hindu aide-de-camp to Lord Louis Mountbatten. And he had access to what the British were up to, what the Americans were trying to do. In 1946, there was a plebiscite that was done in Pashtun area, which was rigged. The British didn't want the Pashtuns to be a part of India. India tried to have a plebiscite. This part doesn't get mentioned a whole lot. In fact, even Nehru was there to campaign for it. But again, one of those botched attempts where they should have figured out that one party was saying that they were neutral, but they were not really neutral. I leave it to you. You read that book. You understand what happened. It's a big, great travesty. Levsa, I'm sorry it took us so long to have you included in this conversation. I'm going to put you a simple question. You know, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was called as Frontier Gandhi, and was very, very popular all over India during the freedom movement. And his movement, the Khudai Khidmatgar, was well appreciated. And I mean, this was something that was not heard of before that. He was a great unifier. Unfortunately, Pashtun, the land, the people could not be part of India for what reasons I can't explain at this point, why the Congress did what they did. But like I said, there was a plebiscite, and unfortunately they could have at least not even had the plebiscite, but they should have known that it was rigged. Anyway, long story short, can you kind of bring us up to date between 1947 and now about what the Pashtun people went through from your eyes, and then we can start looking at the latest developments. Go ahead.
I would say the Pashtun, destruction of Pashtun history and civilization or democratic and moderate values started in 1892 when Pashtun were divided into two by the Britain. And then again, when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and the Western countries invested in extremism. In the beginning, we thought it was inqilab. Everybody know what inqilab is, and my father was part of it. And we all thought that we were being invited, and we should fight for our freedom, and we do not want to be, invited by foreigner. We have always been proud people. We love our history. We have never been, brutal to anybody. We have never invited any country. The only reason we fought against Soviet Union was not because we were religiously extremists. It was just because we thought that, the Western country was there to help us to be a free nation. And then when the Western country left, we were thrown out to Pakistan, and the Pakistan got the opportunity, to use Pashtun and all those people who lost their parents and the oppression, and they were being, injected into religious extremism. And then in 1992, the Pashtun, the game changed. And I don't know for whatever reason it was, but I believe it was because that Pakistan do not want Pashtun to be united, and the Pakistan was using the religious extremism to portray us as extremists, and this is how it began.
Now, what is happening today in the Pashtun area and the PTM? It has some presence in cities as far as Karachi, isn't it? So can you describe to us a little bit about what the situation is on the ground right now?
Yeah, in 2001, when US come and invaded Afghanistan, the Pakistan start playing their double game with the West and, on the Pashtun area, and they killed a lot of Pashtun people and forced them to leave their area in especially Waziristan and in Fatah. And then many Pashtun lost their loved ones, and they were, killed, and they disappeared without any reason. And then the PTM come to being, and the PTM is asking for their rights under the constitution of Pakistan and nothing else. Just recently, we saw in Karachi, the PTM is asking for the release of Ali Wazir, who is a member of the parliament and is also an active member of PTM. He has been there for 15 more months for no reason. We don't know why he is behind the bars, and the Pakistani or the Karachi assembly is not listening to them, but they have ensured that they will release him. Now we are waiting for a month, and then we will see what's happening.
And viewers, some of you have been asking why is Sree Iyer suddenly covering Pakistan? It's important because they used to be part of India. These are all, and there are a lot of things in which India can help. First of all, moral support, and also in trying to define what is going on. This arrest of Ali Wazir is really, really strange. What is happening? But you have to remember.
Sorry to interrupt. It's not just Ali Wazir. All other human rights activists are in jail for no reason. We don't know. They are making false cases in terrorism court. They have called anti-terrorism court, and saying that they have been said some slogans which are anti-state. But if you see at all the terrorists, they are roaming freely. None of them are, restricted. These anti-terrorist court are not used against the hardcore Taliban terrorists. It is just for the Pashtun and the Baloch people, if you look at it.
Absolutely.
Recently, and the PTM, and I will request everybody to just search for Pashtun Protection Movement, and they will see how they are protesting. They have been in Karachi for 24 days. They have slept on the street. You wouldn't see them being physical. They have peacefully protested and demanded their basic human rights, but they are being called terrorists and extremists. And the Pakistani, police has also, opened fire against the founder of PTM, Manzoor Pashtun, in Balochistan. For no reason. Who is terrorist here? Is it the state of Pakistan or Pashtuns? Pashtun are peacefully protesting. They are not being physical. They do not have any guns or anything. But still we are being portrayed as terrorists.
Levsa, all I can tell you is right now Mr. Imran Khan is trying very hard to stay the prime minister. He's been doing he's been arresting his own friends. Some people who helped him get elected, he has arrested them, and for some innocuous statements. So in this last few weeks, there's a fair amount of turmoil going on. I'm hoping that the dust will settle soon, but it is impossible to ignore. I mean, it is impossible to not notice that the Balochi independent people who are asking for independence, as well as the Pashtun, their voices have been suppressed. I can tell you even Sindh's voices are being suppressed. This is just one particular state in this nation of Pakistan that wants to essentially Punjabify the entire country. And this has been going on for a long time. Only now, thanks to social media and to reaching out to people such as yourself, that we are now hearing all the different atrocities being committed by this particular government. The important takeaway that I want to take from this particular conversation is, before we go to the next question to you, Levsa, Professor Nalapat, Can you tell us a little bit about why Pakistan, it's at war with itself? If I can kind of look into the establishment itself, I think has a schism now, has a divide now. There are two generals who both want to be the chief of armed staff, and one is being backed by the prime minister, the other one is backed by the outgoing general. How do you make the situation? There is going to be a no confidence motion before the 27th of March. It has to happen. There's also a foreign funding case that might go against Imran Khan. So a lot of stuff going on right now. How do you see the next couple of weeks? Then we can come back to the next question that I have for Levsa.
You see, Sree, the main problem in Pakistan is that Pakistan is not a democracy. Myanmar today is not a democracy. It was a partial democracy when Aung San Suu Kyi was technically in charge. But even there, the military had equal power or more power. And today, it's a full military dictatorship. Pakistan is a de facto military dictatorship. And I'm sorry to say, it is sheer hypocrisy on the part of different countries. Now, I'm not going to name countries because I like many of these countries. They're good friends of India. But whenever their leaders go visiting Pakistan or they invite Pakistan people to come there, they don't invite the civilians very much. Naam ke vaste they invite, for the sake of a name. They might invite Imran Khan. They're not going to take Imran Khan seriously. The person they're going to take seriously is the chief of army staff his corps commanders. They will be invited. Their children will be studying in the United States, in Britain, in Australia, in Canada, all these locations. I don't know how on their salaries, but they all manage that feat. So this is the whole problem. The world has put a blind eye to the sufferings of the Pashtuns, the Balochs, the Sindhis, the moderate Sunnis in the Punjab also. I mean, for the minorities, you can forget about. There are hardly any minorities in Pakistan now. It's about less than 2%. From around 30% has gone down to less than 2%. And nobody in so many countries is asking anything about that. Nobody is asking about that. But at least among, we were talking about an Islamophobia bill. Well, I want to point out, Sree, that Muslims are being killed in the Muslim majority countries. Whether it is in Pakistan, whether it is in Yemen, whether it is in other countries, it is unfortunately one section of Muslims killing the other. So are you going to call Pakistan an Islamophobic state? Are you going to call the two factions in Yemen Islamophobic? They're killing each other. So this is the track. Afghanistan also, what is happening? The Taliban is going around identifying people whom they believe work for the Americans or the British or the other coalition forces, and they're systematically taking care of them in a way which is, I don't want to describe here, but which we all know very well. So, but is that in the media? No, it's all suddenly about. Everybody in Europe, everybody in the United States, very concerned about Ukraine. Sanction after sanction on Russia, all kinds of billions and billions of dollars of help pouring in. Aren't the Pashtun people like the Ukrainian people? They've also got two eyes, two hands, two legs. Aren't they human? Then why aren't you listening to their suffering? Why aren't you listening to the suffering of the minorities in parts of the world where minorities have disappeared, including in Afghanistan, I'm sorry to say, and in Pakistan? So, Sree, I would like to say the Pakistan people are groaning under the control of the military. So long as the military is in control, the military, which, by the way, has now become an instrument of extremist theology under 𝙒𝙬𝙧𝙁, and that has position has continued under all these successive chiefs of staff. This problem is going to come, and it's also going to come because the West is not really bothered about what is happening, for example, in the Pashtun territories or in Balochistan or to the minorities or in Pakistan. They're not concerned. They're very worried about the Ukrainians. I don't see why. I see Ukrainians, Afghans, Indians, Pakistanis, The people from Africa, South America are the same. We are all the same. But why Joe Biden, Boris Johnson, and his other leaders, they think Ukrainians are different from us? They're the same as we are. Why they treat them so differently from us is beyond me.
A lot of questions, unfortunately, not many answers to this. In fact, US, you would assume they would know the extent of Pakistan's...
If I can comment on it, I would love to do it. Why we are being treated differently is we all know that Taliban are the proxy of our neighborhood country, Pakistan. They are trained and supported by ISI and Pakistani army generals. And I wouldn't say Pakistani because my own Pashtun are also Pakistani nationals, so I wouldn't insult them. So when I asked those general I interviewed for my thesis, master research, they would tell me there were many reasons for why we wouldn't sanction Pakistan. One of the reasons were the Cold War, when Pakistan helped CIA to win the war in Afghanistan. But people forget, and the Western people forget, that it was the Afghan people who fought on the front line. It was the Pashtun people who win this war, but the credit went to the ISI and the Pakistani army generals. And then when the Taliban came, they invited me, but you didn't say anything. Why? It was because it was the loyalty question. So Pakistan helped the Western country to win the war, but they forget it was the Afghan who lost their lives. And the war on terror, it was also the Pashtun people and the Afghan people who lost their lives. And what happened to them in August 2021? They were betrayed by the Western allies. And we were again thrown to Pakistan, proxy Taliban. So the reason we are being treated differently is because we are not the ally of the Western country. I don't know, we have been known since 2001 that we are the US ally to fight against the terror, but in reality we weren't, and we were not aware of it. So we have been betrayed and twisted by the Western country. This is what I have been said many times, that the Western country has not appreciated us. And you said regarding Imran Khan. Imran Khan has become kind of spokesperson for the Pashtun people. Who is he? He's trying to tell the world that the Pashtun people are very, conservative. They love the Taliban and they do not like the women education and women rights. I'm sorry to say it. I'm Pashtun woman and my husband is from very traditional family. So is my family. I'm Pashtun and my family support women education. So Pakistan has got the free, forum on international platform to represent me. You would never see it, Russian do it to Ukrainian, but Pakistan is kind of representing me as Afghan. And this is the one Western country who are supporting them.
Much of it comes to ignorance also. And I can tell you that United States, especially, once they feel like their objectives are met, they completely abandon you. You saw what happened after the Russian withdrawal. They had promised that they would rehabilitate what was remaining. They would pick up the pieces, that they would help Afghanistan with schools and basic infrastructure. And none of that happened. There's a movie called Charlie Wilson's War that people can watch, viewers can watch, to understand at that point of time what happened. And basically Afghanistan was just abandoned, and that's how Taliban came in. So we can go on and on, but my takeaway I'm hoping today is perhaps first Mr. Professor Nalapat and then you, Levsa, conclusion on what you think the West should be doing. Right now, the West might be looking at the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but this is also an important one because lines are being redrawn, and this might be as good a time as any. Professor Nalapat, you first and then Levsa.
Look, I'm optimistic for the simple reason that I have confidence in the Western people. There have been some voices in different, in different parts of the world that look, people who are of European descent are very narrow-minded and very selfish. I've said openly in many fora, and I'm telling you that people who are of European descent have played a very significant role in helping me to develop my own ideas, not their ideas, my ideas, and in disseminating my ideas across the Western world. I'm sure that that Levsa will be meeting the same situation. There will be Western people who are helping her. The point is today, the media, I'm sorry to say, Sree, please don't, as a loyal American citizen that you are, don't get upset. But there is no difference between Pravda and the New York Times or the Washington Post. No difference between the Pravda of 1918 and 1991 and the Washington Post of today. They are both propaganda mouthpieces for the government in power. And they give a very slanted narrative. You've seen that on steroids in the Ukraine conflict. And this is what Levsa has been so bravely and courageously pointing out. And I'm really surprised that she's able to do that, because there must be a lot of very conservative people there who believe that, people in Afghanistan, Pashtun, they're lower level people. So we can't have the same European standards for them of human rights and human dignity. Well, I'm sorry. Hello. There are universal freedoms and universal rights. And everybody is capable of enjoying those rights and of deserving those rights. Winston Churchill thought India was not capable. The Hindus were a beastly people. Indians are overall ghastly people. So never give them freedom. Winston Churchill was wrong. So I'm only saying, Sree, that have confidence in society, in India, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. Have confidence in people like Levsa, who, as she very correctly said, she and her husband, who's giving her complete support, by the way, and he comes from a very traditional Pashtun family. The point is, traditional Pashtun families, up to towards the middle or the end of the 1970s, when the Russians began interfering in Pashtun society and really interfered in force in the 1980s, they were proud of their moderation. They were proud of their education. I have Pashtun friends. Some of them are Hindu. Many of them are Muslim. And the grandfathers. Yeah, exactly. There are other people. There's a gentleman called Kishore Lal, who's a very proud Pashtun. And he was telling me there were temples, there were gurdwaras, there were Buddhist monasteries all across our Pashtun lands. And somehow this evil force of extremism just destroyed all of them, destroyed our lives, and destroyed the lives of the Pashtuns as well. It is what Levsa is pointing out.
And Levsa, if you could give us your concluding thoughts, and then we'll have this conversation again in a few weeks' time.
Assume you asked that what could be the solution for this is, I would, state that to support the Pashtun protection movement and the Pashtun women and the Afghan women who are protesting against the brutal regime of Taliban, which has been installed by the Pakistani ISI and their army generals. And Pashtun are not extremists. We are not dangerous. We are not monsters. We are peace-loving people.
Thanks, Levsa, for taking time to join with us. And we are going to have more conversations on this. This is just an introduction, if you will, of Pashtun, Pashtunistan, and the history of Pashtunistan and what is really happening to the world. I'm hoping that this will open the eyes of many people. And I'm very sure that we'll have you back along with Professor Nalapat for more such conversations. Namaskar.
Inshallah.